Critics Podcast.
Armchair Critics Podcast.
Members of the notorious Armchair Critics Podcast have been arrested for having too many opinions.
Armchair Critics Podcast!
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 10 of Armchair Critics. It is the special 10th episode. We don't have anything planned, but I'm happy we made it here.
This is a milestone.
So this week, we are covering a movie which Ethan recommended. This is Brian de Palma's 1981 thriller, Blowout. I'd heard a lot about this movie, but I had never seen it before this week. So I'm going to start out by asking, Ethan, what do you think of Blowout?
I've got written down, the only thing better than De Palma behind a keyboard is De Palma behind a camera. While it's the well-paced twisting script that made me want to return to Blowout, it's De Palma's peerless direction that never seemed to escape my mind. I found myself on the edge of my seat as new information was revealed at just the right time, only to slump back in amazement at the most unique shots I have ever seen. All the while, I couldn't help but imagine De Palma grinning like a mad scientist as he concocted one crazy idea after another. You're about to hear a sentence that has left my mouth not 5 times in my life. But this is a film that was at least as good on rewatch. I am not a huge fan of rewatching movies, but this one was just so good. And, you know, like I said, the reason I really wanted to do this and was excited to do this is because I really loved the script and, you know, the exciting, gripping, kind of noirish narrative. But there were so many incredible shots that were seared into my brain that I was excited to see again and just did not lose the zing that they had on that first time. But Aidan, this is your first time. I want to hear how your first watch went.
All right. So this is the second De Palma film we've covered in the podcast, the first being Scarface. Mm-hmm. Scarface is probably his most popular film, and I really, really loved that movie. Even more than like some classics like Goodfellas. I just love Scarface. But I think Blowout is even better.
Yes!
I cannot think of a single aspect of this film that I disliked or that I thought didn't work well for what De Palma wanted. Every decision that I was initially confused by or unwary about paid off. Example, the first scene. The intro, I'm like, all right, you know, this is, I mean, it's stylish and, like, interesting, you know, doing this one long take. We know De Palma loves his cool long takes, and, like, it's cool on an aesthetic level. But, like, you know, I know De Palma likes his pulp, but, man, what is this? And then it zooms out and it reveals, oh, this is not the actual movie. This is a low-budget slasher movie that our main character is working on, and it is supposed to be bad. That, just the movie begins with that, and then everything after that, wow. The directing is amazing. It almost felt show-offy in just the way De Palma constantly exercises his skill. I mean, you've got these crazy split diopter shots throughout the movie. You got this, like, gorgeous bright lighting. You've got this amazing noirish soundtrack and the way it's used in this twisting, complicated plot. And the entire time I'm thinking, you know, this is a great experience of a movie thus far, but like Scarface, it's going to be made or broke by me for the ending. And just that glorious, ridiculously tense, desperate ending just tied it all together and just bam, you know? It was perfect.
I'm so happy to hear you say that. Those are my thoughts exactly. Brian De Palma, man, this guy is crazy. That opening shot, that opening scene you're talking about is so funny. This film is like like a parody of itself almost, you know? Like you were talking about the score. There were some moments where it almost sounded like a parody, I guess, of classic noir mystery soundtracks. And there were a couple shots throughout that were just funny how over the top they were. But it was he knew when to be serious, and that ending is a gut punch, and he knew when to throw a real punch and when to give us something a little goofy. But yeah, I have never ever seen a director like Brian de Palma. Like 15 minutes into this film, I was just like, all right, this guy's just not even like incredibly disciplined. Like, maybe he is, but he is just genetically talented to be one of the greatest directors of all time. This is just stuff you can't teach. He just has crazy ideas that I bet if most directors had, they would not even try for it. But Brian De Palma says, here's something wild. I'm gonna make it work. And it works.
It's really really hard to pick a favorite aspect of this film because I think just everything works together so well. I do just think his directing shines in a way I've seen in very few movies.
Yeah.
Like, I can see why Scorsese and these other directors like proclaim De Palma as one of the greatest directors of all time. You know, he has this. I was originally thinking, well, yeah, he's very skilled, but he doesn't have much clarity of vision. But he does have clarity of vision. He's creating a De Palma world, and this movie did remind me of Scarface in a fair number of ways, although the main character is significantly more likable.
Yeah.
You've got these political undertones throughout, for example. In some ways, this feels a lot more like a 70s movie than an 80s movie, in that it's very paranoid.
Yeah.
You don't, it's this, there was this feeling in the Cold War of, in American art in particular, you had these two gigantic powers, the United States and the Soviet Union, who were just clashing with each other. And both of them were gigantic and mysterious. The average person didn't know, 3% of what their government was up to. And both of them had the ability to basically annihilate all human life on Earth if a conflict broke out. So there was this paranoid sense of like, do they even care about us, that pervaded a lot of movies, particularly in the 70s. You have like The Parallax View, and I think The Manchurian Candidate came out around that time too. Blowout reminds me of stuff like that because you've got this character, John Travolta's character, who's trying to work against the system. He's realized, okay, something's wrong, and I am going to speak up about it. I'm not going to let the government hide this from us. We got to find the truth. And it just results in the death of the woman he loves and leaves him a broken man. And the people who are responsible for it, except for Burke, who's the only person involved in the conspiracy who actually gets any kind of repercussions, the people who actually planned it and who actually benefited from it just walk away smiling, basically. We don't know who they are, but we know that they have won.
Yeah.
And that's what makes the ending so great for me.
Yeah. Throughout this film, Brian De Palma just kind of like adds one extra layer to every idea. And one of those being, this is... Yeah, paranoid is absolutely a word I would use to describe this film. And it's kind of like this definite mistrust of the government, and that's great and everything. But then just the icing on the cake is this is all taking place in Philadelphia with this big patriotic celebration. They like recreated the Liberty Bell out of pennies and stuff, and there's parades and stuff, and everybody's feeling very great about their country. Simultaneously, the next president was assassinated, and the government is covering it up, and it just makes it like, wow, that feels bad. It's like this sickening kind of addition. Makes it super cool.
It's this gigantic, cosmic irony, both with the fact that, what's her name? Nancy Allen's character. I feel bad I can't remember the character's name. Sally, that's right. Yeah. Sally's death literally happens in front of a gigantic American flag. And then, Jack Terry holds her body weeping in that one gorgeous spinning shot with just a gigantic array of red, white, and blue fireworks going off around him. Like Scarface, I didn't expect this to be a political film, but it was, and the message made it that much more refreshing. My favorite films are the ones where it's moment to moment very enthralling and entertaining and frequently tense, but it also has something that it wants to say and a deeper theme going on. And like a lot of the great movies we've discussed thus far, like No Country for Old Men, for example, this movie succeeds at that. Not only is it incredibly engrossing and fun to watch, but it leaves you thinking.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about some exposition. And this is a film that, maybe I shouldn't say exposition, but setup. Because there is setup all throughout this entire film. Especially in Act 1. This is not like this, Shutter Island type of mystery where you feel like afterward you're like, I need to rewatch this immediately. There's so many details I missed. Except there definitely were a couple that I didn't realize. After the scene where Jack Terry is in the studio watching that, B-list horror movie, you get like your title sequence, and it's overlaid over Jack working on sound stuff, doing whatever a sound guy does, while the news is running. And wow, what a fantastic scene. Because the news sets up the entire film, I found out. They talk about the parade that's going to be happening. The anchor, she's talking about the election that's coming up. She even starts talking about a bizarre string of sex killings, which we find out the pertinence of later. But then simultaneously, we get shots of Jack working on sound. And I mean simultaneously. The screen is split in two, and we get to see both at the same time. And
oh, that's right.
I thought that represented kind of Brian de Palma's take on exposition, or just revealing information, very well, because it is very subtle and efficient, but entertaining. Like, we see Jack being a competent person. That's a bit of characterization while there's simultaneous, setting. But it's just entertaining to say, I'm getting a little bored of watching just this anchor on the news. You switch to these nice-looking inserts of Jack Terry working, and say, I'm a little bored of this. You go back to the news. It was Brian De Palma's thinking of you, the viewer, here.
It's like it anticipates those TikTok videos that got random Minecraft parkour gameplay right alongside the actual funny video. That was one of my favorite aspects of the plot or of the filmmaking, and something that I'm not sure I've really seen in any other movies from this era was just the split screen.
Yeah.
And the way he used that for phone calls and just montages of stuff. It was very entertaining. And I was watching it, I'm like, this is some Scott Pilgrim type stuff.
Right.
Where did this come from in a movie made in 1981?
Yeah.
But yeah, the exposition was immensely skillful, and just everything has this great payoff. I loved the entire first act. I thought the second act, while remaining very, very entertaining, maybe did drag a little bit.
That's fair.
I think the first act is just perfect movie, Yeah. I love the characters and their interactions. I love just watching Jack go about his job. It's immensely fascinating. He's a likable and interesting protagonist from the get-go. John Travolta plays him extremely well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one aspect I didn't expect. He has not been in a good movie in 20 years, but I legitimately really like John Travolta as an actor. You know, he's great in this. He's great in Pulp Fiction. I mean, you know, he was even good in like Grease. You know? he whatever he's in, he throws himself into it. Even if it's a bad movie like Gotti, he's still consistently entertaining to watch.
Yeah.
And in this movie, he is perfectly able to portray sort of an everyman character who's also competent enough and likable enough that you can believe he is able to follow along with the plot well. He doesn't seem like, you know, when Jack Derry accomplishes something in the plot, it doesn't feel unrealistic that he'd be able to do it. You can tell, yeah, you know, this is a guy with a past working with this kind of stuff. It makes sense he'd be good at it.
Yeah.
And he's just a likable enough guy that you're rooting for him.
Right.
To the point that I was on the edge of my seat with my mouth open during the ending as he's racing to save Sally, you know, because I legitimately had no idea. A lot of movies, you know, you've got this ending where it seems where a character is in very grave danger and the other character is trying to get into him in time. But, you know, it's a cliched movie, so you know that the character's going to be saved. And they weren't in this one.
Yeah.
That's what made it so great.
This film is incredibly unique. And we said that last week with Jojo Rabbit, which is a unique movie. But this is probably more unique because there are some things in this film that I have never seen replicated in my life ever, specifically videographically. But that extends not just to, you know, how unique it is, but how non-generic it is. I watched Jurassic World Dominion finally recently, and you're absolutely correct. Like, throughout the entire film, I said to myself, there is not a single sliver of a chance that one of the characters on the poster is going to die, you know? But with this film, it could. And she does. She does die. But also, you know, this is, like I was saying, it feels like De Palma is playing around with these tropes of the noir genre, extending even just to the mystery genre. But it doesn't feel... it doesn't feel like something that's been done before. And it was very refreshing to see this kind of movie where, yeah, your main character is such a competent character who's just in the same mindset as you. Because often you can get to a mystery and the audience is supposed to figure out something, you know, just a couple moments before the character. And often it's just exasperating waiting while nothing is happening just for them to figure it out. But John Travolta figures it out, and then you figure out what he figured out. And I figured that was just a way more compelling and gripping way to display these kind of revelations, which I said in my opening were very well paced. Like, this is a film that just never got stale. There was a scene in the entire runtime of this movie that I felt went on too long. Maybe objectively there's another, but I was even on. This is a rewatch, and I was gripped, and it was just exciting. While as things that I knew were going to be revealed to me were revealed, I was still pleased.
Out of curiosity, you might want to get into this more later, but what was the single scene that you thought went on too long?
It was a dialogue scene between the two leads, Jack and Sally, and it was all like it was in Act 2. So I felt like we should have already known the stuff about Sally that we were learning. She was talking about her like makeup, her interest in makeup, and it was just like, we heard about this already, and this is like a little unnecessary. Like, I just love listening to you guys talk, but maybe we could be doing something else with this moment.
Yeah, I can see that. let's talk about the sort of impetus scene. I think I'm using that word right. You know, where he witnesses the murder.
Oh, man.
That is such a great scene, and then, you know, it just reverberates throughout the rest of the movie, is sort of reliving this scene. On one level, even just when it starts, and I sort of knew the premise of this movie, but I also knew that it was sort of a mystery plot-focused movie, so I purposefully didn't look up anything else about the plot before going in.
Good.
When we started the scene, I thought it was just going to be a scene of him recording sounds. Mm-hmm. And I was totally cool with that. It was just fun to watch him work it out. You know, it's... I think... I heard this said in a review about a movie recently. I can't remember which one. I think it might have been Heat. I think I was reading someone talking about Heat, and they said one of the reasons Heat is satisfying to watch is because you don't often get to see people being good at their jobs in movies.
That's right, yeah.
Oftentimes, the protagonists in movies will be sort of idiots or incompetent, because then you can, you know, have them make mistakes, which the audience can obviously see, in order to drive the plot and have more conflict. That is not the case here. As I said, Jack Terry is a capable guy. He's good at his job, and it's just satisfying to watch him work on sound design. Yeah. In the first scene especially, I'm just thinking, you know, I want to be a sound guy.
Right.
This looks awesome. And De Palma luxuriates in that, in the minutia of this technical job, in a way few directors do. One common thing in movies, so movies are frequently about artists, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And about people who have big ideas or who are just sort of floaty liberal arts types, right? I'm going to say that. I think I can say that because I am a floaty liberal arts types. My point is, not many directors are willing to show the technical details that go into every job, including creating art. But De Palma does. And it is so fun to watch. Just watching him, you know, move these tapes together, and it makes the rest of the movie a little more just enthralling because it fleshes him out as a character. And like the scene where he finds out all his tapes are erased, you really feel for him because you can see how important those tapes are and that he needs them for his job. It doesn't just exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
But anyway, going back to that scene, you know, you get all these great just little shots and stylistic stuff. You got like the nice split diopter shot of the owl, for example, was one that stuck out to me. And then just bam, you know, you've immediately got this enthralling, exciting event, a car accident happening right in front of you. And as he freaks out and dives in, you know, and the music just like comes in, it's such a wacky score. Yeah. In that scene, I almost thought it sounded like something out of a Studio Ghibli movie or something. It didn't sound as noirish as the rest of it. It's just like, you know, chang, 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 chang. But he dives in. I see this random guy in a fedora in the background freak out and start running away. And then you've got this incredibly tense scenario as he tries to get this girl out of the car with a little bit of extra horror because there's literally a corpse in the front seat with his head exploded. Yeah. It's just De Palma understands perfectly how to make things interesting. Both things that are inherently interesting and things that are not. So you never, ever get tired of watching.
Yeah. This is another film that is pretty dynamic, not because it's high octane. I would say that a film that spends its entire runtime at, you know, a level 10 for energy would not be dynamic. But because this film does not, it is. There are moments where, you know, you get a sense of this ebb and flow. You understand kind of what De Palma wants in a scene in terms of that energy level. And it oscillates perfectly. But that scene oscillates midway through the scene. And it has one of, possibly just the most relaxing moment in the film and one of the most tense moments in the film. But wow, just the way I felt like watching that scene, I understood what it takes to be a sound guy. You know, there was no dialogue, but I knew what was happening just because of the way that De Palma would move the camera and then move the focus. And, man, watching shots of, like, it would just be like, the focus is super shallow with, like, a telephoto lens. So the microphone is elongated, and just the tip of it, where it picks up the audio, is in focus. And it's like,
I loved that.
It looks so good, but it's like meaningful. You know, you feel like it's this, I don't know, kind of like this living thing that's going out and receiving sound. And then it would be intercut with the way that John Travolta moves his eyes, and, you know, just subtly looking around. And you would get these kind of POV shots that were not intended to be POV shots, but they were intended to be, like, showing where De Palma or Travolta's eyes were moving, or rather Jack Terry. And it would just be like, he hears a sound and he's looking for something, and you just see the water, and then you hear another ribbit and focus racks to the frog, and oh, he found it. I was like, I've never seen a director do something like that. That was so cool. And, of course, that shot of the owl was, for a while, that was my favorite shot in cinema history. And to this day, it's probably still my second. It's so good. Just like, the split diopter is probably used more in this film than any film ever before. But it looks so good. And it's such a unique looking shot, and the owl just, like, turns to the camera, and it's like kind of like this sense of surveillance. Like, you understand this owl kind of represents Jack Terry, like, looking around, being a little nosy. And then finally, there's one more thing that was great about that scene that neither of us have mentioned yet, and it was that mysterious sound, like that click, click, which,
oh, that's right,
we have no idea what that could be. That could be something natural, could be something man-made, and right after that come the squealing tires, and that concept is developed as the film progresses. There's another time where this woman is about to be killed, and you kind of know something bad is about to happen to her, and you hear the same sound again, so you know it's something tied to people dying, but you still can't tell. And then later on, you see it's the guy, the assassin, pulling kind of like this piece of his watch out, which has a wire attached to it, and it makes that sound, which he uses to strangle people. And
I did not even pick up on that.
Yeah, it was just, that's the kind of, like, setup and payoff that De Palma was exercising most astoundingly throughout that film. There's one more thing. This is as good a spot to put it as any, but if we go back to that scene where De Palma or Jack Terry is playing around with a sound while the news is going on in the background, all of the sound effects are sounds that we hear that he picks up from the car crash. It's like glass shattering, gunshot, and body fall, or something were like the names of the tapes that he was working on and perfecting. I just thought that was crazy. That was a crazy thing to put in.
Yeah, it's just this tight formal control exhibited over all of it. It's really interesting to look at this in the context of sort of like 70s and 80s independent movies, which, you know, has got to be one of my favorite eras and types of cinema. And there were sort of two classes of them, you know. One of them is sort of the John Cassavetes school of thought, which were even lower budget and which were very loose. and improvisational. I watched this one movie with John Cassavetes and Peter Falk in it, which was made in 1979, I believe. It takes place in New York. It's got this sort of noirish feel to it that Blowout and Taxi Driver and a few other films from the era do, and it's called Mikey and Nicky. I didn't love it overall as much as I would have hoped I would, but one of the interesting things about this movie's development is that the director, Elaine May, used about 3 times as much film as most movies of its length and budget do, because she would just let the 2 main actors improvise and just converse well on camera. She would just keep it rolling for hours and hours and then just work whatever she thought worked well into the film. It's a very interesting approach. De Palma is the opposite, and he's sort of the predecessor to these kind of obsessed directors that you occasionally see in the modern age. Guys like Denis Villeneuve, or especially guys like David Fincher, who just like to have control over every single aspect of the screen. And sort of the 80s, and even more so in like the 2010s, you know, they finally had the technology to control literally everything that you see on screen and just have complete and utter mastery of it. Yeah. De Palma has a clear vision in mind, and he just goes for it.
Well, can you tell which obsessive director who preceded Brian de Palma heavily inspired this film?
I think I know the one.
Tell me.
Alfred Hitchcock.
Yep. I've seen, shockingly, 0 Hitchcock. However, that doesn't mean that I don't know his style. I don't know. His reputation precedes him. And
we should really watch Rear Window
I would love
and Vertigo at some point. Rear Window is the movie that made me love movies.
Yeah.
So we got to cover that at some point.
But that's one thing that's pretty cool about this film is, man, I guess it was Heat. Heat was another film that we've covered, also neo-noir, that was kind of made in the image of, or rather inspired by just a love of cinema. And I kept thinking of Heat throughout this film, because specifically the final confrontation in Heat, there's 5 seconds of that film that just turn into this crazy camera movements and close-ups and use of focus, and it looks a little cheesy but like really cool. And we talked about how he thought that Michael Mann did that on purpose to kind of, you know, show how much he loves that kind of TV, Miami Vice, 80s, you know, action tropes. And this is kind of the neo-noir mystery version of that. Blowout is. Lots of homages to Hitchcock, and lots of just decisions made solely because this film is representing and showing a love for its predecessors. And man, it's just so cool to see something that's like, hey, I kind of know what you mean by that. I see what you're referencing.
The way the score treats the scenes in particular reminds me of Hitchcock, and just the general ebb and flow of sort of tension in this movie, of which scenes are tense and which are not. So one of his movies that this reminded me of, and I'm going to try not to spoil it, it's called North by Northwest.
Oh, yeah.
Really, really good movie. And in this movie, the main character for a lot of the runtime is on edge and very paranoid because he doesn't know someone is after him, but he doesn't know who and he doesn't know why. He's just on the run for his life. So a lot of the scenes have sort of this tense, edgy music or just no music at all to accentuate the tension. However, the other lead of the movie, it's not Grace Kelly, might be Kim Novak, I can't remember. The scenes where he's with her, it plays this very schmaltzy, you know, classic orchestral music, lots of like violins and stuff. And the score of this movie reminded me of that. if I'm remembering correctly, that scene that you brought up earlier, the scene where he's with Sally in the restaurant, you've got this very, like, soft, pleasant music playing throughout. And then, if you've got these, like I was talking about, dramatic trumpet blares and stuff and all sorts of discordant, terrifying music in climactic scenes. Like the flashback where he's talking about when he was helping out undercover cops. And he comes in and he finds this guy hung by the wire that he put on him. He opens the door, sees him hanging there, and just burn.
Oh, yeah.
And he freaks out and he goes, "Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, no. Bwah, bwah." It's so classic, and you can really, really see Hitchcock there. But at the same time, De Palma doesn't use music in every scene. And like Hitchcock, sometimes he just steps back and also dials his style back a little, I'd say. There aren't quite as many, flashy shots in some of the more climactic scenes. He just lets the action and the tension speak for itself. I'm thinking not particularly of the ending, because the ending's pretty stylized, but of the action leading up to the ending.
Oh, yeah.
Where Burke starts walking off with Sally, and we know that he's going to kill her, and Jack knows that he's going to kill her, but Sally doesn't know that. Mm-hmm. And there's almost no music. It's just them walking through a train station, and Jack Terry frantically trying to find them, and you can just, Burke keeps, like, pulling out his wire and getting ready, and then something interrupts them. And there's just nothing. It's just simple cinematography, just letting the action speak for itself and just, like, working you up into a panic for the final release of that incredibly intense ending.
Yeah, there's something about this film that I can't quite articulate, but I'm gonna relate it to a film that I know you love, Aidan. Drive. Oh boy. I know we're split on that, but there's this similar quality, I would say, in both, where Drive is also very derivative, very inspired by, kind of what both this and he are inspired by. Kind of this vaporwave, slight aesthetic, and neo-noir. Anyway.
80s plus 40s.
Yeah, yep. Right. It leans into both genres in a way that it's what I would argue is it's self-aware that this is kind of cheesy, but I would say that in that film, Refn is saying, like, I know this is cheesy, but it's good. It's cool, though, isn't it? And I think that's what De Palma is doing here, too. Like, oh, man, it's so cliche to have this kind of, like, tension building as this guy's just like, no, yeah, walk right in front of me. Don't look at me. I'm going to get out my murder weapon, and I'm going to, like, reach around you. Oh, but she looks at the last moment, and I have to put her away and act like I was doing nothing. But it's just, like, it doesn't feel cliche. Like, I'm simultaneously thinking, like, yeah, that's based on other stuff, but also it's just done better. Like, I'd say De Palma there is saying, like, yeah, this is me leaning into that genre, but it's cool, isn't it? I'm just doing it better. Yeah. And that whole ending is kind of that way where it's just it's cliche for a reason. People started doing it because it's a good idea. And I shouldn't be using the word cliche. It's a used idea that De Palma purposefully strays from the cliches on. And wow, it's so tense. It makes me think, again, of Heat, of the scene where the LAPD gets a tip that De Niro's crew is in a bank right now. And they descend upon their location. But De Niro's crew doesn't know that they're out there. And they're setting up, and they're getting across the street. They're, like, lining up a shot. They have Val Kilmer in their sights. And Val Kilmer is walking to the car as slowly as humanly possible, which is just like, it feels kind of cliche that you would just cut the film to make it look longer than it actually is. But my heart is racing. And the same thing is happening in that scene, where there's just so many moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, she should be dead now. She's going to be dead in any minute. I can't take it. Just get there. Please, Travolta, save her. But it was so cool. The payoff, it kind of does the opposite. It says, you know what I'm going to do, right? Look. He's about to stab her. And John Travolta gets her there in the nick of time. And it's like, oh, that's a cool classic trope. And he kills him, and you're like, yes! Oh, wow, that was so close. And she's already dead. Because you see earlier on, he strangles his victims and then stabs them. And I was like, oh, man, you totally threw me. One of the most unique and impressive uses of pre-existing tropes, in my opinion.
They're tropes because guys like De Palma or Michael Mann do them so well that they then spawn a host of cheap imitators. You know, it's periodically movies like that will come along that have that effect to a massive degree. I'm thinking particularly of The Matrix.
Yeah.
The Matrix, the next 10 years of movies were spent trying to imitate what made The Matrix so cool. Every sci-fi or fantasy movie or whatever had to have, 90s grunge and black leather trench coats in it and bullet time, of course, because The Matrix made it cool. Same for The Dark Knight, which almost ruined, the next 5 years of superhero movies after it came out. The exception being maybe like The Avengers. I don't know. But a lot of bad movies tried to capture and made The Dark Knight good.
All of DC.
And, oh yeah, the DC Extended Universe, it got its rough start because it tried to be Nolan, and, it wasn't Nolan, it was Zack Snyder. But Blowout was a very influential movie on a lot of directors. Edgar Wright, for example, whose film Shaun of the Dead we covered in our second episode, he said that this is his third favorite film of all time. Yeah. And that actually makes sense, because I was thinking, some of the stuff in this legitimately looks like something that would be out of Scott Pilgrim.
You're right.
Of course, Edgar Wright made Scott Pilgrim, and he loves Blowout.
Wow.
And just that focus on style that fills his movies, you can really see in this. It makes a lot of sense. And a lot of directors, Scorsese has declared this one of the greatest movies of the 80s, for example, and he just venerates it. And you can actually see this movie's influence, I'd say, in his work a little more, too. In the 70s and, sort of the 80s, Scorsese was a little more dialed back, Yeah. Taxi Driver, obviously, is stylish in many ways and has a very vivid, explosive finale. But for the most part, it's a pretty restrained film.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's not super in your face.
Especially compared to, Goodfellas.
Oh, yeah. But then with stuff like Goodfellas, or especially like The Wolf of Wall Street, where Scorsese just goes full throttle on everything. Yeah. He does a De Palma and just has fun being excessive while making this movie. De Palma is just so influential in so many ways. And it's even funnier because this movie was a complete flop when it came out.
Yeah. This is
word spread of its bleak ending, which people hated, and it didn't even make back like half its budget. It did terribly.
That's crazy. This has got to be one of the most underrated films of the 80s.
Oh, it's got to be. It's definitely one of the most influential.
Yeah.
Although it's gotten more regard in recent years. Also, shout out to the gods of Criterion.
Yeah.
A new 4K transfer that they just made is coming out, and the 4K edition is being released on September 6th.
Really?
And they released a trailer for it, just showing that one scene where they're in the bar, and it's not even a super climactic or visually stunning scene compared to the rest of the movie, but wow, does it look good.
Man.
It's just the film in all of its glory, and I'm almost wishing we had waited a couple months and I'd watched that transfer instead, because I just watched the grainy one on Amazon Prime. and even that was just stunning. So I can't wait to see what this looks like when it's fully restored.
Yeah, I've definitely got to check that out. One thing that really well, I guess I talked about this already. I was talking about how this is a film that did not need for certain aspects to be taken to the degree that they were, but they're just way better. For example, I said, taking place during, this patriotic time while it's this, very paranoid, you could argue anti-government piece. But another thing that really stood out to me was kind of the entire character and position in life of Jack Terry. We are shown very early on, almost immediately, that he is better than what he's doing. He's kind of bored with how easy it is, and he just kind of sloppily relies on sounds that he used for all of his other movies. But then when we see him, going out and picking up audio, he looks so competent. He looks so competent when he's mixing it, and we get that really nice scene when he's really driven. He is he's marking up the audio to match it with the photos that were taken of the crash. And we might say, what's this guy's deal? And then we get kind of his backstory about his time with the police force, where he would wire up guys and they'd try and implicate criminals, specifically dirty cops. And in that interaction, he ends up, because of his wire, their inside man gets found and killed. And he kind of holds it over himself, and you might be able to argue that he's kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm just filling in the gaps, and maybe he would just not apply himself because he is still atoning for that. But it's definite that he's still atoning for that. He still feels really bad. And so that ends up being his kind of the force that pushes him into this narrative. He's in the right place at the right time, but we have seen already that this is a guy that doesn't really care. However, he gets a moment to kind of make up for something that he's done, and he takes it. And he just gets further and further in, more and more involved, to a point where he's caring so much where Sally's like, whoa, you don't think you're overdoing this or anything? And then that makes the finale so much heavier. Not only does Sally die, he accomplishes nothing. This grand conspiracy, it just goes on unnoticed. And it's just he when it's tied to that past regret that hasn't been absolved, it's still not absolved. And it's just got to be so degrading. And that's just, like I said, that is not necessary. Without something like that, it would be weak, but it does not have to be that good. De Palma just has great ideas. He pads this perfectly.
He's left in exactly the same place he started, but with 5 times as much guilt hanging over him.
Yeah.
He's like a nervous wreck, you can see at the end, where he's just he uses the scream for the movie, that he's working on. And, as the director goes, it's great. And he just plays it back over and over again. He just shudders with this deep anguish and puts his hand over his ears. And that is just the ending image of the movie is so powerful and sad. It's just a punch in the gut.
Absolutely.
I think the theme of the movie is brought out in all these little ways. So as you said, De Palma treats it with this sense of a little bit of irony and comedy almost in some scenes, but he knows when to be serious. Like during the ending, where Jack Terry drives through this massive parade, he smashes into an enormous shop window which is labeled Liberty or Death. And I think that's sort of a reflection of the ending of the film. He's hoping for liberty and he gets death, you know?
There's like that specific shot of like the one guy on the noose who falls. I was like, what was that about? I didn't see the title of that shop.
Oh, yeah. And it ties into the grand irony, which is, you know, a mockery of the values that America is supposedly based on. Where America is, you know, supposed to be this land of freedom, but at the same time, you've got this, like, massive corrupt government that is crushing the people's ability to do anything meaningful, to actually be free in any way. You know? I can't say that I fully agree with the themes of this movie. I don't know. I honestly feel like I'm not fully comfortable enough with the geopolitical situation in the 80s to really comment on it. But I think the way the film expresses its themes is incredibly interesting, and it's reasonably subtle. It's discernible without being annoyingly in your face. It just gives you something to chew on.
Yeah, I watched Midsummer for the first time the other day, and it was just like, whew, my mind was blown by Ari Aster as a director. Unbelievable. But I'm watching this, and I'm just like, what is even going on? Like, I know there's just stuff I'm not getting because I haven't read 10 textbooks about ancient pagan traditions, and I don't know the runic alphabet and stuff. So this was just like super nice. I've been watching a couple films like that recently where it was just like, I came out of it and I'm like, I'm not even dumb, but I have no idea what just happened, you know? Yeah. And this is not that. This is like, this is a film that, again, like Heat, you know, I always said, Heat is kind of a film for everyone. You know, if you want a deeply thematic film, Heat is deeply thematic. If you want an action movie, Heat's an action movie, you know? And this is kind of like that. You know, you don't need to be a genius to enjoy it. And if you want to dissect this film, there's plenty there. It's not inaccessible. It's actually very accessible.
Oh, yeah.
I just like that. I don't know. Like, of course, you should have to work for a reward, you know, otherwise it's no reward. But this really strikes a nice balance of, you know, you earn it. There are definitely scenes where you feel intelligent. Roger Ebert actually wrote that in his initial review. There are scenes where you simultaneously piece together the mystery of this whole conspiracy, and you know you are rewarded, and there's just enough information where you don't get the whole picture, but you fill in the pieces, and you know it's very rewarding, not punishing, and I really enjoyed that.
Like a lot of great movies, it respects your intelligence without being like purposefully obtuse. Yeah, that was like one of the issues we both brought up with The Master, which we covered a few episodes ago. Right. It's a very intelligent film. There's a whole lot going on, but the way Paul Thomas Anderson expresses it, a lot of the time you just legitimately have no idea what's being said or what's going on.
Yeah.
Blowout, you have to use your head. You know, you can't completely turn your brain off for a movie like this. Mm-hmm. But it's you can see what it's saying. And it's the same case for like Scarface as well. Is another example of expressing themes well in a way that's satisfying without being annoying and just being an incredibly entertaining movie to boot.
Yeah. Well, Aidan, I think we're here. What is your favorite scene in this film?
All right. I knew this is coming. Oh, man. It's hard to select one because there are so many great scenes in this film. We already brought up a couple of the best ones and talked about them. But I think I just really, really love the ending, especially from the part where he gets out of the ambulance and starts racing towards Burke and Sally to the very ending where he mutters, "It's a good scream," and covers his ears. I don't know if you can technically count that as one scene. It might be two.
I'll
but
count it.
It's so good. It's just this like raw, heart-pounding tension. And as you said, De Palma almost toys with you at the very end because Travolta grabs a hold of Burke, stabs him, kills him, and you're like, all right, this is so satisfying. You know, the incredibly hateable, like, scumbag villain of this movie is out of the way. He saved her. He has not saved her. She is dead. And then right as he starts weeping and just cradles her body, the fireworks go off around him in that one amazing spinning shot.
Oh my gosh.
Just a gigantic array of irony pounding in his ears and mocking him from every side with this enormous American flags displayed out behind him. And, you know, then it just leaves him broken. He tried to work against the system and he failed. And it's just brilliantly directed, brilliantly written, brilliant the way it wraps up all the themes of the film. All of the acting is great. You know, Nancy Allen is great. John Lithgow, who plays Burke, is great. Mm-hmm. And Travolta especially is so good at just communicating this anguish. He gives a fairly minimalist performance for most of the movie.
Yeah.
And at the very end is where he just unleashes himself and is just racked with emotion. You can just see it in everything. You know, it's just one of the greatest endings I've seen in a while. Maybe ever.
Wow. Yeah. Man, that scene with the fireworks is so good. It's so cool. For me, I think it would come down to my favorite aspect of the film. The script is so good, but I love the videography so much. And so the most densely packed scene with great camera movements and just shots is that the inciting incident when he picks up the car crash. And, no surprise, because I already spent like 10 minutes talking about it here. But just every single shot was so good. But there's more to it than that. I remember, like, watching with my mouth agape the first time. Just that there's, like, this a wide shot of the entire scene as Travolta plunges into the water after. And, yeah, this mysterious figure in a literal trench coat and fedora just runs away from under the bridge. And you're like, what the heck was that? Like, it's just such a bold decision to, like, there was something happening right here, right now, that he has no idea what's going on. And it's like, but it wasn't even like, usually if you were to do that, it would be like, all right, this is the focus of the shot. Here's a mysterious figure, close-up of them running away from under the bridge. But it was like almost missable. It looked that way, but it wasn't. So it was kind of like one of those things where like you feel rewarded for paying attention. But I don't know, probably everybody saw that, and I talked about the setup with that mysterious noise. And man, like that's such an integral scene to the movie, not just because it's the inciting incident, but because it's referred to again and again, both auditorily and visually. It just has to be perfect, and it's done so well. The second time around, it's still exciting. It's the perfect amount of mystery without feeling like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna know more later, but right now I've got no idea what's going on. It's just like somebody was in a car accident, and then even extending to the next scene, De Palma does such a great job slowly revealing information where you get to... I actually forgot that they did it this way because, I just remembered the president, the guy who's about to be elected president is in that vehicle. And he finds out later when the cops start storming the hospital, you say, well, what's going on now? And then you find out, oh, that's the president. But it's not even like he tells you, this man what is he, the governor? He's the governor. He's about to be elected president. He doesn't just say it like that. He's just like, we're going to need you to keep quiet. So now there's this conspiracy before you even figure out, what's the conspiracy about. De Palma, I just felt like that scene is everything that he's going for in this film, done all at once and done the best. And I loved it.
He plays around with tension in that one scene in the hospital in a way that you wouldn't expect. Because generally after a scene as climactic as the scene where he rescues her from the car, after a scene that intense, you'd have a scene or two of sort of falling action where you just kind of relax a little, take a deep breath. And the scene in the hospital initially seems like that. He's not injured. He's just wandering around in his t-shirt and he's chilling out. And then right as he thinks he's good and he's takes out a smooth, relaxing cigarette because it was the 80s.
You can smoke in a hospital.
Yep. Bam. Cops come in the door. They're all freaking out. They're grabbing people, interrogating people. And you're just thinking like, this is way bigger than it initially appears.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just De Palma understands what your expectations are of a movie and subverts them by making that scene, in some ways, even more climactic than the previous scene.
This is a bit of an honorable mention that I'm not going to spend too much time on, but man, this is still like it's just a short bit, but it's such a good scene in any film. But the scene where De Palma, or I keep saying De Palma, Travolta, Jack Terry keeps coming back to comes back to the studio, I guess it is, where he's got all his tapes, and he finds out that they're erased. Man. The camera, it's like, how did De Palma even think of this? He's just gonna like spin the camera around in a circle forever, and the scene's just gonna unfold. But it's done so elegantly because there's like never a moment where the camera is showing nothing important, but it just like it doesn't even slow down. It's just set on a swivel and it goes, and there's always something to be looking at in frame. The blocking and staging was perfect there, but simultaneously, it's just like this strange, unique way to reveal the information, but so natural. Because Terry grabs a tape and he puts it in, and it just makes a weird noise. And at first, you just have no idea what's going on. You're like, is that just what the tape sounds like? And then he grabs another, and you see he's kind of frantic, and he puts it in, and it's just more weird noise, and you still kind of don't know what's happening. But he keeps, like, he's fumbling around, and he's throwing stuff all over, and he's putting tapes in, and they just have, like, weird noises. And, like, each noise that's added is kind of like this constant drone that kind of supplants these strings that you'd have in an orchestral score. But there's no score. But that sound, like, builds tension the way that a score would. And... like, wow, just like everything about that scene, the audio, the visual, and the actual content is just more unique than anything I've ever seen. That's just the way that this film goes.
Oh, yeah. It's just De Palma having fun again. It's glorious to witness.
Yeah.
All right, Ethan. It hurts for a movie this good, but no movie is perfect. So I'm going to ask you, what do you think is your least favorite aspect of Blowout?
All right. I'm gonna set this up by showing you like how perfect this film is. There are three complaints I have with it. One of them I mentioned is I thought the pacing in one scene, a single scene, was not perfect. Another, that fireworks scene is amazing, but they don't quite match the lighting with the fireworks, and that scene is like kind of obviously a green screen. That's how nitpicky I have to get. That's how nitpicky I have to get with how a film this good.
Yeah, that was one of my few issues too, but I found it didn't bother me that much. It was like, is the same in the driving scenes, you know? The rear projection was fairly obvious.
Yeah.
But I could sort of excuse myself by going, you know, this is a very noir-inspired film, and noir films had that too. They had pretty obvious green screen and rear projection happening throughout. And, you know, I was like, all right, yeah, it didn't bother me. And the fireworks shot, even on just a technical level, is impressive enough and cool looking enough that I was willing to give it a pass.
Absolutely. It's still one of my favorite shots in an astoundingly, like I said, videographical film. But the one thing that sticks out above everything else, I just don't get the importance of that car scene where he's like driving through the parade. I feel like, again, I was reading, Roger Ebert himself was saying that it's another callback to Hitchcock, where in his films you see protagonists making, a public disturbance, to kind of accentuate how important this scene is. It's like, I'm willing to drive a car through a parade. That's important. But
yeah,
it didn't get him anywhere. At first, it's like he wakes up in an ambulance and you're like, oh, shoot. Now he's stuck. But he's not. He just gets out and goes away. It adds nothing like narratively. And I don't think it's obvious enough to be like a great callback to a Hitchcock style, and as gripping a scene as it was and effective as it was, I feel like it just needed like one more thing for me to be like, this earns screen time in this film. If it were like somehow thematically connected, where it's just like he's stopped by one of the cops and he's like, just shouts like, I have information that the governor was killed in a conspiracy. And he's like, yeah, I know, I'm still arresting you. Like, I don't know, just throw something in like that. That's a pretty dumb example, but just something. What do you think about that?
I think you've definitely got a good point. It just feels too consequences free. You could, like, I don't think this is the case for any other scene in the movie. You could probably legitimately just remove that scene from the movie and edit out the bandages on Jack Terry's head in the next scene, and it would have zero impact.
Yeah.
Like, it would be a little bit of an unsatisfying conclusion if Jack Terry was just arrested for driving through the parade and dragged away and then Sally's killed. But, like, it just makes absolutely no sense that he's able to just run away after disrupting the biggest event in the city for like 50 years. He literally drove through. It's a miracle no one was killed. He would
He wasn't even honking the horn.
Right. At the very least, they wouldn't just leave the ambulance door open with this guy who disrupted this parade with a minor head injury and just go, well, I hope he doesn't wake up and wander away. So yeah, that's a nitpick, I guess, but I think that scene may be the reason that this movie is like a 9 instead of a 10 for me, although it's very close to a 10.
What about you, Aidan? Do you have anything at all?
A least favorite aspect? Oh man, it's difficult to choose one. I think I have the same basic complaints you do, particularly about the parade scene. I will say I wish the villain had been not necessarily better developed, but like maybe introduced in a different way, because it's sort of difficult to he's kept mysterious because the guys who hired him to do this, or the organization behind him, which is probably the government, is mysterious. Mm-hmm. But like, you're just kind of wondering, where did this random guy in a hard hat come from?
Yeah.
And most of the scenes involving him I like. I think John Lithgow gives a really great performance as the character. He's very like smarmy and hateable and just kind of fun to watch, and how disgustingly evil he is throughout. It sort of reminded me of that one character in Heat who's also a serial killer, but like done better, because the serial killer subplot was actually relevant to the plot. And as you said, it had that really satisfying payoff, and well, not satisfying, but interesting payoff in the final scene where he's about to stab her, but you know that she's already been strangled and she's already dead. But I don't know. I wish the character had been introduced a little differently and been given a little more heft when he entered the movie, because, you know, he's probably the third most important character in the film. He's the central antagonist.
Right.
So that, again, that's a bit of a nitpick, and I think the stuff that you mentioned is bigger complaints. But yeah, that's about all I got. As I said earlier, no film is perfect, but it is quite difficult to criticize this movie just because of how in control of everything De Palma is, and how much raw, natural talent he has that just spills into every frame and every line of dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely. That brings me to one more point I have. The way that this narrative flows together. This is a very, precisely constructed film, like we've been saying, but it doesn't. Sometimes you watch Fincher films, and it doesn't feel unnatural, but it doesn't feel natural. It feels like someone, it feels like David Fincher made this movie, a perfectionist, a psychotic perfectionist, This film is not that. I talked, I don't remember on which episode, but about this kind of idea that you want to connect your scenes or concepts with the conjunctions so and but rather than and. And this isn't a film where it's like Jack saves a girl and he decides he wants to help her, and there's a guy who's coming to kill her, and all his stuff is erased. It's all connected by so's that are set up so far ahead of time. Like, there's even one thing that I missed where when the one villain is preparing to change the tire of the car with the bullet hole in the original tire, he's replacing that tire. He opens up his trunk, and there's a box labeled tape eraser, magnetic tape eraser, that he tosses away. And then later on in the film, Jack Terry's film, all his audio gets erased. And the single transition that sticks out to me the most is, again, with that villain, when he murders that one, the first murder that we see, when he he's like rolling down the hill and he stabs her, and it cuts to this shot of his shadow, like it cast onto the wall. You can see his arm rising and falling, and then the camera like rises and moves across the street and starts zooming in on Sally, and all of a sudden it's a different scene. And it was like crazy, kind of this visual connection between these two plots that are happening in the same film. But it was just like, oh man, like I feel like that's just how the world works. Like it was not a time jump. In just one camera movement, we connected two different scenes. It was so fluid. It was very natural. This is a film that breathes.
Oh, yeah. All right. Ethan, I don't know about you, but I think I'm about running out of good things to say about Blowout. This is a fantastic movie. It was a pleasure discussing it. It was a pleasure watching it. And folks at home, I don't know why you wouldn't listen to this episode if you haven't. But if you haven't, please go watch Blowout.
Yeah, we haven't spoiled all that there is to see. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for our big 10th episode anniversary. I guess we picked a good one.
Yeah.
If you have any comments or questions or film recommendations, you can email us at armchaircriticspodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us. We have a Twitter at Critics Armchair and an Instagram, Armchair Critics Podcast, for updates on upcoming movies, more ways to contact us. Anything you want to say, let us know. We're open. Our inbox isn't flooded yet, so we'll take some fan mail. And make sure to tune in next week when we will be covering Akira Kurosawa's Ran. Other than that, thank you guys for listening to the end, and we'll see you next week.